Hello, I'm Stephenie Overman. This is Freelance Breaking News, Promises and Pitfalls. We have two speakers with us today, or presenters. We have both Katie Nelson and Haisten Willis. I'm in Reston, Virginia. Katie is in Minneapolis now, and Haisten is in Atlanta. I'm moderating this session because I have a lot of questions. I did a little like what they did in terms of covering breaking news for someone else a few years ago. And I realized that there's a lot I don't know and a lot I'm behind on. I did cover it. I covered it for the New York Daily News and I got paid and it all happened. But I realized there were an awful lot of things I didn't know that I was doing. And one of the questions I'll ask you as we get going is, what do you put in your go bag? Because I didn't have one. I think the thing to start is I'll ask Katie and then Haisten just to kind of walk through how you got the assignment and if you had a previous relationship with either the New York Times, Katie, or with the Washington Post. Let's just start there and do that. Katie?
Hi, my name is Katie Nelson, and I am a journalist, photographer, and filmmaker, usually based in Nairobi, Kenya, but currently based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I grew up due to the COVID-19 pandemic. I left Kenya in mid-March. They were closing all the borders, and so I had to leave or otherwise be stuck there indefinitely. So I came home to Minneapolis, and this was before the demonstrations for George Floyd. George Floyd's, the site where he was killed is about 20 blocks from my house. And I have covered other Black men who have been killed by police officers in Minneapolis and the surrounding suburbs before for smaller publications like Public Radio International. And so I came home and went out as I would do just to see what was going on during the demonstrations. I wasn't assigned by anybody to go out, but took some photos, actually posted them on Facebook and was just like, hey, here's what's going on. It was the first day of the demonstrations. And I got a call from a cinematographer who I met once, Mike Shum. He lived in Nairobi, but we actually met in Minneapolis in January, had a drink with a friend, and then, you know, kind of never thought anything of it. And he called me and he's like, hey, I saw that you were out in the demonstrations. Would you be open to taking on an assignment? And at that point, I really only had one or two other offers because the demonstrations hadn't really started yet. And so we didn't realize it was going to be such big news. And so I was commissioned on the second day. Well, it was pending, but I was commissioned on the second day for $125 to take photos for the entire day by a wire agency. And I was going to do that because I just wanted to be out at the demonstrations. And Mike called me and said, what do you think about the New York Times? And I said, sure, sure. I hadn't worked with them before. I've worked with other international publications like National Geographic, AP, Al Jazeera, but I hadn't worked with the Times yet. And so the editor called me, he put me on the assignment just for the day with Mike. So I was producing and Mike was the cinematographer. And then that was the night that the 3rd precinct burnt down, which was the police station in Minneapolis. So Mike and I worked till about 2 a.m. and then the next morning we were on the front page. And so that's kind of what started our huge blitz into covering the George Floyd protests in Minneapolis.
Okay. And Haisten, you have worked for the Washington Post before?
Yes, yes. I have been associated in some way with the Post for about 4 years now. They have this really interesting formalized system of working with freelancers called the Washington Post Talent Network. If you're a freelancer and you want to work with them and you haven't already done it, look up the Washington Post Talent Network and see if you can still join that. But that's a formalized system, like I said, that they have for working with freelancers across the country. The way the Talent Network is really, I think, primarily set up is big breaking news out in your town, in your area, they will give you a call because they don't have a post reporter in Spokane, Washington, or you know, some other relatively small places. They'll be able to call somebody using the Talent Network and get somebody that way to cover breaking news. So I signed up for that in 2016. What you can also do through the Talent Network, though, is actually pitch them stories. So I started doing that not long after I joined, just pitching kind of random stories. I did not have much luck at first pitching stories. I pitched them for 2 years without getting anything in. They turned down 27 pitches in a row. My 28th pitch, though, in 2018, 2 years later, was accepted, and I started doing real estate stories for them. So I'd kind of developed, after that, this little side gig of being the kind of unofficial affordable housing reporter. I was doing housing stories. I'm still doing those. I've got one out actually today, a new affordable housing story. You can check out the real estate section. But anyway, I finally got some breaking news through the Talent Network, the traditional breaking news portion of the Talent Network, when coronavirus hit earlier this year. Albany, Georgia, which is a rural town in southwestern part of the state, was a big coronavirus hotspot. So they called me up and said, "Do you want to go to Albany?" And of course, I didn't really want to go to Albany that bad, but I knowing the importance of the story and everything, and that it was the Washington Post, I went on there and did that. And then ever since then, I've kind of become a regular for them. I did some other coronavirus stories when Georgia was the first state in the nation to start reopening. I went out and did some coverage there. And then when the George Floyd protest hit Atlanta, I started covering those as well. So I've kind of had an ongoing relationship since 2016 that has really blossomed this year into doing a lot of stuff for them.
Okay, great. So the 28th, after the 27 rejections, okay, we keep this in mind.
It was the 28th pitch that finally did it.
The
That's
28th
right.
pitch. This is freelancing.
Yeah.
Now what I'd like to talk to both of you about is, you're called by the Times, the Post, someone to cover breaking news. And as I said, I didn't have a go bag. First of all, do you have a go bag, and do you want to tell me what's in it and why you have one? And then kind of what are some of the things that you need to take with you when you go and when you get there? Katie?
So my life is a go bag because I am a foreign correspondent, and I've actually gotten really good at packing for assignments. I do a lot of video and photo, and so I have a lot of equipment, but you know, making it as compact with the assumption that you're going to have to carry it for at least 8 hours a day on your back is really important. In my go bag, I mean, for these specific demonstrations, we had no idea that they were going to become violent or that there were going to be any use of tear gas or anything. So at the beginning, Mike and I were like, "Oh, we'll just go down there and see." And I said, "Hey, Mike, do you have any PPE, like a ballistic helmet or a stab vest or whatever?" And we're both like, "No, because you know we don't use them here." And Mike's worked all over the world as well. And I said, "Why don't we just throw in some bike helmets just to be careful, you know?" And he's like, "Yeah, okay." And we ended up wearing bike helmets for the first night because there were a lot of rocks that were being thrown and flashbangs towards us and towards demonstrators and vice versa. So we looked a little funny. Actually, people made fun of us and were like, "Why are you down here with your bike helmets?" And they came in handy. So I do say skateboard helmets or bike helmets. I also, you know, because of COVID, we had a lot of N95 masks that we were using, hand sanitizer, wipes. I always bring water with the electrolyte powder in it because you'd be surprised at how much you get dehydrated. I mean, there's obviously like the go-to kind of reporters' notebooks and stuff. Ballistic goggles, they, you know, if you can't wear a gas mask, because many of us didn't have a gas mask at the time, at least the shield of having ballistic goggles over your face for a second kind of stops the tear gas. Luckily, the New York Times was so gracious and they expedited all of our PPE out a couple days later. And that really helped. But just preparing, also like in terms of training and key fat training, which I'll talk about later, isn't quite a go bag thing, but just being as prepared as possible to be in violent situations is super important.
Okay. And in Atlanta, what did you have?
Yeah, I didn't have much of a go bag ready. I have not done, you know, foreign correspondent work or anything like that. I was not really necessarily super prepared to do this kind of work. I would definitely say a helmet, something I wish I had brought. I'd seen a few rocks thrown and things like that. I've not seen a rock hit anybody, but that's a really good idea. And I had not even thought about a bike helmet. I've got a bike helmet sitting here in my office. I hadn't even thought about the idea I could just bring that. So that's a good idea. I did bring a mask. I made sure to wear a mask to make sure that I was protecting myself as much as I could. I wanted to make sure my interviewees were comfortable speaking with me, so I definitely brought a mask. I had of course, I had notebooks and I had my phone to take pictures and record interviews and things like that. The big issue I ran into that ended up making a decent amount of news was that I did not have a physical press badge. I don't know if Katie did or not. I was issued one via email by the Post. And same thing, I said, okay, that sounds good. I didn't really think I'd run into an issue with it anyway. But I ended up staying in Atlanta after curfew as instructed and was approached by a group of police officers. I tried to tell them I had a credential on my phone. They didn't believe me, or they said that a credential on my phone didn't count. And I ended up spending about 10 minutes in handcuffs and was searched. They were emptying my pockets, I guess making sure I didn't have weapons and all this kind of stuff. Very scary experience. Ultimately, it was brief, although I did believe for 10 minutes I was being arrested and taken to jail. And it ended up being broadcast on the local news, which was also interesting. But so big thing I wish I had was definitely a physical press badge. It would have saved me a lot of hassle. But yeah, a helmet was the other thing I would definitely recommend bringing.
Katie, do you have a press pass of some kind that you were using?
I didn't actually. So the New York Times also issued us a letter that just said, their correspondence for the New York Times. And Mike and I were really extremely clear and also very lucky that we weren't arrested, because a lot of the colleagues around us were. But Mike and I were very clear with officers. Like, I would stand behind him as he was shooting, saying, like, we are press, with my hands up. I would always have my camera on me as well, and he had a huge Sony S7. And so surprisingly, they didn't harass us terribly. When there were opportunities to look at a press badge, they never asked us. But I will say, and this is going to be public in the next few days, I am a plaintiff with the ACLU of Minnesota, and the case is against the police for excessive force against members of the press. And there were a couple incidents where we yelled we were press and we felt like we were targeted. And there was a specific incident late in the evening one night where we were driving. I was driving and Mike was in the passenger seat. We approached a line of police officers and National Guard mixed. I yelled out the window, "We're press. We're just trying to pass here," because there was no other exit. And they said, "We don't care. Go home." And I said, I had my blinker on. I'm like, "Please, we're just trying to pass." And they shot at our car with pepper bullets, which when they explode, they have a tear gas kind of pepper agent inside them, and so you can't breathe, which was extremely scary when you're driving a car. And so I will say that while a press badge wasn't particularly helpful for me in either direction, there was no doubt that it could have been for other people who were arrested, who were members of the press. And there was no question that the Minneapolis Police Department was targeting members of the press.
Might be a good time. You had mentioned training and the specialized training. I think we might want to get into that at the moment. If you can talk about the kind of training you've had and how it's useful.
Yeah, so I was trained in hazardous environment training. We say that's called HEFAT training. And I was trained by RISC, which is Reporters Instructed in Saving Colleagues. It's an organization started by Sebastian Younger, who trains journalists who work in active conflict on basic first aid, as well as some combat and conflict medic training. And so you get a certification at the end, but basically the idea is that you want to work with other people who have HEFAT training or RISC training, because you can trust them to take care of you, and vice versa. So actually, strangely, Mike and I both had RISC training. It's not that many people that have it specifically through RISC, but I felt exponentially safer working with him, and I know vice versa, just because we had the same training by the exact same person. But one of the things that I really encountered that I think would be an important tip for freelancers is that when I started working for the Times, I was also getting a lot of calls from other publications who were saying, can you cover, are you assigned to anybody? And obviously I was assigned to somebody. So I tried to pass off these assignments to people that I knew in Minneapolis, with the caveat that I did not feel comfortable giving people jobs if they did not have HEFAT training, because I knew they would be turned down by editors many of the time. And I was shocked. Nobody had it. Nobody had it. And I talked to a couple people about this, and they said, HEFAT training has really been given to international foreign correspondents. And so many people who are local don't have that training. And I just felt like there has to be some sort of change here, because not only is it good to know the kind of medical things to do in combat or conflict, but it also trains you to stay calm in these situations. Both Mike and I were pretty calm most of the time. They do scenarios where you are hearing bangs and there's, you know, flash bangs going by you and stuff like that. So you kind of learn like a second muscle here on how to work in combat and conflict training. And when I saw other people out who didn't have that training, I gave one assignment, you know, to a wedding photographer. I was like, best of luck. But, you know, I saw a lot of people who were just really deer in headlights. And it was scary. It was scary for me to watch too. So I think that's really important to keep that training.
Did the New York Times require that you have the training? Did they know?
They did not. They asked us. I don't know if it was a requirement, but they did ask us, have you had hazardous environment training? Do you have PPE training? That kind of thing. And,
okay.
Yeah.
And how long does it take to get the training? If I wanted to get training, what would I do? Approach them, and how long would it take to do it?
So my training through RISC is application only. And so I think our training was 3 or 4 days, you know, full day. And I think on average RISC is free. So anybody who's doing kind of combat or conflict training, it's RISC training, should look at RISC. It's free. And normally these courses cost between $3,000 and $4,000. So it's, you know, it's really important to get, but it's really prohibitive. But there are a lot of organizations that do sponsor journalists to get it for free. So definitely Google it and look that up.
Is it being done remotely with COVID-19? I would think you'd have to be around people.
You know, somebody told me that they did remote HEFAT training, and I was just like, how do you learn how to tie a tourniquet when, you know, when somebody's bleeding out? But apparently it does exist. I mean, it's better than nothing. But again, the simulation of working in conflict that they do, where they have you crawl on your hands and knees and pull out a dummy and tourniquet the dummy who's bleeding, it did prepare me for just the physical and mental toll that covering conflict does. Even just like getting used to really loud bangs all the time near your ears. If you haven't had that, that experience many times, it's very scary. So it was really helpful in that respect too, not just the first aid.
Did it make recommendations on what kind of personal protection equipment to get and to use? What were some of the recommendations?
Yeah, so one of the things that's really important, that's where I would learn the bike helmets kind of knack if you don't have a ballistic helmet. But there are a lot of different kinds of PPE. So ballistic helmets stop certain kinds of bullets. Bike helmets kind of stop rocks. I tend to be in more civil unrest, so the rock helmet generally is okay. I'm not around snipers like people might be in Iraq, Afghanistan. So there are different kinds of helmets like that. There are also jackets. The two big differences are stab vests just stop like sharp objects, while the plates, there's ones that you can slip plates in, ceramic or I believe steel plates to stop different strengths of bullets, or like the distance that a bullet is being shot. For women, I'm quite petite, I'm 5'5". I highly suggest ceramic because the steel or the other metal plates are extremely hard to run with. You are basically, you will be in one position the whole day if you have to wear the steel ones. So those are better for if you are embedded in a place like Somalia where you're just in a car the whole time, you can wear steel. But if you have to do any movement, the ceramics are much better. And then a gas mask, those are pretty standard with the 2 canisters that you can take out and refiltrate or get new canisters. Ballistic goggles are super cheap, please get them. And they are supposed to stop bullets, but if they fall off your face, they're not helpful. And then I will just say that I wore an N95 the entire time I was covering the demonstrations for 4 weeks, and I just got a negative COVID test. So please wear, like, if you have a N95, super, super helpful as well.
And Haisten, did you have, we talked a little about this, but what are you going to get for the next time that you have to cover protests or demonstrations? What did you decide?
A helmet. Yeah, of course, a press pass would be a good thing to have, and a helmet as well. Yeah, I haven't seen any, rubber bullets, but not any real bullets that I know of. But I did see a few people that threw rocks or threw other objects, water bottles and random things that they got their hands on. They would throw in the air. So a helmet would be the thing I would recommend.
And when you were out on assignment, how were you communicating with editors? And also, were there other reporters that you needed to coordinate with? I assume you weren't the only person, say, they're covering it for the Post. So how did that work?
So the Post, I actually was the only person in Atlanta that was covering this stuff for the Post. So they're really, like I said, it's pretty dynamic the way they work with people. They'll have feeds coming in from really all over the country, in this because there are protests in so many different cities. So it was really actually pretty simple. I just had to say what was going on in Atlanta. I just had to feed them my piece, and then an editor would kind of cobble all this stuff together into one story. So I just sent them what I had. And what was really difficult was giving deadlines and just where I was. I actually was filing stuff from my car. And at first I was bringing my laptop with me and trying to write on my laptop and then like find somewhere that I could convert that. And so I've ended up doing actually is writing stuff on my phone. I'm like sitting there, you know, taking my notes and writing stuff on my phone, which is obviously far from ideal, but it actually worked out okay with me. That was probably one of the biggest challenges though, was figuring out how I can file stuff while I'm actually out in the scene like that.
And keeping things charged as you were out on the scene, I think keeping your equipment.
Well, yeah, my phone has a pretty good battery, so that wasn't too big of a deal. And the laptop too, that wasn't really that big a deal, keeping things charged.
What about your equipment, Katie? And working with people? I'm sorry, I got both of those.
Yeah, so I was really lucky. So as a producer, we had to set up a couple of different like drop places because Mike was just, his face was in the camera the whole time. So I was kind of figuring out all the logistical stuff. So what we did was we set up a base at my house, which is only 20 blocks away from a lot of the action, in the attic, where we have very high speed internet. And we would come up here. We would not talk to my parents or anything like that because of COVID. You know, at that time, people were really like, how is COVID spreading? And we were very anxious about the whole thing. I have an autoimmune disease. My mother has asthma. And so we really needed to be careful. So we just, Mike and I would come back a couple times a day, and then we'd walk up to the attic. We would drop all of the footage onto like a server. And as we had that card in, we'd take another card out, and we would go back into the field and then check to see if the card was done when we came back to drop that one. I also, you know, called a lot of friends in advance who were near some of the hot spots. So like the 3rd precinct, the 5th precinct, the George Floyd Memorial, and just said, hey, look, I might be in my car and I might need to be filing stories. Can I park outside your car, and can you give me your Wi-Fi password in case I need to do that? And so I used a couple of people, like 3 different people in 3 different places to do that. The New York Times was great about communication. We'd have kind of like a team online huddle in the morning, or like a phone call. They'd give us some direction. And then we would check in a few times a day. We were on WhatsApp a lot. They gave us a lot of freedom to kind of suss out the story as it was unfolding, but give us a lot of direction, as well as like deadlines and when they needed them. The interesting thing was that I had never seen is that sometimes I would be asking the interviewee questions while Mike was rolling. And the New York Times actually asked me to call them in on some of the interviews so that they could transcribe the interviews as they were happening and like get a gist of what was going on with the story, because it was that fast of a turnaround. So somebody was kind of like always available 24/7, which was amazing and probably horrible for their life. But it was super, super helpful, and they're very communicative. Oh, and then one other thing that I did do is I have a tablet, because I don't like to carry around my laptop all the time. I have a tablet with an extendable keyboard, and it takes a SIM card that's like a cell phone SIM card, so you can get access to Wi-Fi, but it's like only this big, and then you can just take the extendable keyboard and file stories, which is super helpful.
What about the results, the stories that you saw? The story, you're just phoning something in, Haisten, and you see the page 1 story with your name on it. What did you recognize of yours, and how did it fit together?
Sure. I mean, not everything I did was by my phone. In some cases, I did have more time, and I was able to actually, drive back to my house. I don't live that far away, but it's still a good 10, 15-minute drive to get to my house from downtown Atlanta. What I saw, yeah, I mean, they would kind of slide in what I wrote along with other people's stuff, and I thought it looked pretty good. I'm still kind of getting used to that, I guess, working with at a bigger paper where you'll have like 4 people sharing a byline. That's not really what I'm used to doing, but I thought.
One of the things I noticed as a freelancer who's been working by myself for a while, 20 years, that having the other bylines and looking through and wondering, where's my contribution and what might someone else have put in, that, you kind of worry have to we're used to being collaborative again, I think, on some of that.
Yeah, I guess to me, though, it's really nice, honestly, working with a team, just having other people working on the story. You know, you're sweating to me a little bit less, honestly, because you've got other people kind of doing it too. If there's an issue, you know, you can kind of share the blame instead of just one person is.
And you don't have to be two places at once, which can be good.
Yeah, and to bounce your ideas off of, you know, what do you think about this? Should I interview this person or that person? Having somebody you can really bounce ideas off of,
Yeah,
really nice instead of always being, you know, by yourself, basically.
and Katie, what when you saw what you'd done, how did it look? Did it come out as you expected, or?
I mean, I died. I died. I mean, everyone's kind of knows the struggle of being a freelancer, but I mean, there have been so many times in my career where I'm like, I'm going to quit. Like, nobody's answering my emails from the WashPo talent thing. Like, nobody's answering my emails from like these editors. I can't even tell you how many times I've fallen flat on my face and gone like, I can't, I'm not cut out for this, you know? And so to see our work on the front page, like with our names on it was a lifelong dream that was suddenly very much realized for both Mike and I. And we were both like giddy, but we're like, did we just peak in our career now? You know, like, so it was like, what are we, you know, what is this afterlife?
Yeah.
Because, you know, as a freelancer, you're just so used to like hustling with this grand idea that maybe someday, like you'll make it. And it just felt so concrete that like at that moment we made it. You know, and for us, I mean, above our own egos, we felt very proud that we had gotten that story out because it was so important, especially, you know, the burning down of the 3rd precinct, which was like on one of the 2nd or 3rd nights. You know, he lives here, I'm from here. We knew a lot of the activists, we knew a lot of the people that were out there, and we really felt like we did our due diligence in telling the story well and accurately. And I don't always know that can be the case or that you can say that, but we felt like we were good stewards of journalism at that time. So to see us on the front page, and then we landed on the front page 2 more times after that, was just stunning for us. And Mike is a freelancer too, so it was quite stunning.
Yeah, can I jump in as well? I just wanted to add that, yeah, that's exactly how I felt. Yeah, seeing my name has been on the front page. Actually, over my shoulder here is a framed copy of one of the posts from earlier this year that my name is on the front page. And yeah, like Katie said, that's just an amazing moment. It's like, I never dreamed that would happen to me, have my name on a paper like that. So that really has been huge and very proud. And yeah, I am an Atlanta guy. I'm here from Atlanta. So being able to speak with people and, you know, tell an accurate version of the story from a local's perspective, I'm also proud of, as Katie said.
So now sources return your phone call. Is that one of the perks of this? They know who you are.
Katie, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, it was interesting to say like, yeah, I'm with the New York Times and I'd really like to talk to you. But, you know, I mean, all of these stories are very polarizing. I mean, a tragedy happened in our city, and the media, particularly in the Trump era, is not particularly respected. And so, you know, I mean, yeah, there was some traction when we said we're reporters with the New York Times, but not a whole lot, you know, and people still are very wary of the press. So I think more just being from the community, being from Minneapolis, having reported about this before, went far, far farther than being from the Times.
And being from the Times. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think being able to, I mean, of course it's exciting to say I'm with the Washington Post, but I don't know if that necessarily helped me with interviews. It really depends on the person. But a lot of times I actually felt like that kind of made it a little bit more difficult to get the interview. They're like, you know, who are you? Or, you know, they might think of political things to do with that paper. I actually would kind of start, I'm with the Washington Post, and then I kind of cut in and say, but I'm from here in Atlanta. I'm not from, you know, I have to kind of actually walk that back a little bit. It can kind of work against you.
That I know the city, yeah.
But I'm from here, right? Yeah, exactly.
On the follow-up to this, because this is a question that comes up a lot in freelancing, how was it invoicing things, getting paid, whatever you negotiated, any expenses? Just can you kind of give me a summary of that?
Yeah, I'll go first. Since I was already part of the talent network again, they kind of get all that set up front when you join the thing. So I didn't have a ton to do with that since I'd already had a prior relationship with them. Let's see. Sorry, what was the rest of the question?
Just trying to find out if there were any problems in getting paid, because that's a perennial freelancer problem. But you say that it was set up, and you've been paid by them before. You're known.
Yeah, yeah. So it wasn't too bad. They're pretty smooth. The only thing I had to do was send them my mileage, and but they would send payment a few days after that. So I didn't really have any problems on the payment side.
Okay. Katie?
The Times was excellent. As with signing on to any new publication, there's like a lot of paperwork that you have to fill out. And, you know, to my own detriment, I just didn't have time to do it for like 4 weeks. But they paid me very promptly. The New York Times was really good about having me expense any meals that I had, which, because we were working so much, we really didn't even have any. My lovely mother was listening in, packed us packed lunches. I'm 35 years old. And she was like, just go and have it. And so that was really nice, but they were really good about that. But I have worked for a couple other publications, well, many in my career, who don't pay me on time / I have to bug them. And I mean, that's a forever struggle, but thankfully the New York Times was really, really good about that.
Were you able to kind of negotiate all this at the beginning quickly in terms of expenses and was it a day rate?
Mine was a day rate, and they initially hired me for 1 day and then extended our contract ultimately for about 2 weeks. And it was really nice. They put us on retainer for days that weren't too active, which I really haven't had that in many publications before. So that was half my day rate, was the retainer. The New York Times paid well for a newspaper. I worked for a couple other organizations, or publications, I should say, that started me out they wanted to start me out as a producer at $350 a day. I said, absolutely not. This is hazardous environment work. I'm providing all my own gear, and I will not work for that. And I think because of the leverage of knowing that, you know, not only had I worked for the Times, but I had hazardous environment training, and all the other producers were taken in Minneapolis, I was able to get that to $650 a day, and then $50 a day for a per diem. Again, I think it's good for a news business. It's not great for a actual business. But I very much negotiated. And at one point, when I said, you know, I will do it for $650 plus $50 per diem, they laughed at me. I mean, there was like laughter coming out of their mouths. And I was like, you know, why don't you guys think about it and get back to me? And ultimately they did. They signed me on for another week. This was not the Times. But I was really proud that I said, you know what, this is hazardous, you know, environment work, and we've been tear gassed, we've been hit with rubber bullets. I just am not willing to do it for less than that.
One of the things we talk about in the SPJ freelance community is kind of finding your day rate, your rate per, I'm used to being paid by the word. Other people are used to being paid by the hour. And it's important to have the day rate, I think, in mind when someone comes to you out of the blue and says, you know, what do you want? What do you expect? How was it with the Post? Oops, lost him.
Oh, sorry. Say it again. I was taking notes. Sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. Was asking how it was negotiating with the Post. Was that all done beforehand since you'd written for them before?
Yeah, it was pretty much, again, I had a prior relationship. The rate of pay was pretty consistent with what I've been paid in the past. I didn't do a ton of negotiation. Maybe I should have, especially $700 a day. That's pretty impressive. Now, usually what I was doing was not honestly a whole day's worth of stuff. They didn't have me out there for like hours and hours. I would usually go maybe for 2 hours. I'd be down there. It wasn't a ton of time, so I was not being paid, you know, it's $700 a day, but I was being paid, I think, pretty good, like Katie said, for a newspaper, right? And again, I'm getting a bunch of other stuff too. Some days I was just actually here in my office doing phone calls. You know, it wasn't always going on the front lines of a protest. So yeah, it was pretty smooth, and I think it's a pretty good rate, again, you know, for a newspaper.
Can I ask a little more about the talent network? Because some people, I've heard people talk about the problem of of getting into it and not hearing back from anyone. What's the trick?
Do they mean getting into it at all, as in becoming a member of it?
Getting any response, a kind of a lag in getting any response from the Post.
Gotcha. Once you're in, getting responses to your pitches, then.
Well, but did it take a long time to be actually in the application?
For me, no, I think I got on when that thing was pretty new. It was, fall 2016. It was actually right when I became a freelancer. It was really perfect. I was contacted by Sharon Dunton, who's a member of SPJ. So the fact that I'm in the Talent Network at all, I partially owe to SPJ. So kind of a plug for SPJ there, the networking benefits. But anyway, I was able to get in as far as being a member of the Talent Network right away. So it may be that, you know, the thing's 4 years old now, that there's a lot of people that they're not as keen on finding out new folks. But again, as I said before, even once I was in, it's not like I was really in. I was sending pitches, you know, very, very long time without getting anything. They would usually respond to the pitch, but it would be like a one sentence, "We're not going to run this." I mean, it was a response, but it wasn't really a response. So I don't know about as far as getting into the Talent Network itself. But yeah, it's hard to break in. I had there were hurricanes that hit Georgia, I think in 2018. A couple of times I got emails from them at midnight that said, "Do you want to cover a hurricane?" And I responded at 8 a.m. and said, "Yes, I will cover a hurricane for you guys." And they said, "Thank you," but someone else already responded and said they would cover the hurricane for us. So, you know, it's just competitive. It is the Washington Post. A lot of people do want to write for them. It's you know, it can be difficult to get in.
Let me ask, from your experience covering these protests, what advice do you give to freelancers who are not familiar with this and getting started? You've told us a lot of things I think that are really helpful, but any other things that you want to bring up that that they should know if you're not used to it?
I think that there's something really to be said about being collaborative and networking and setting up good networks ahead of time. So the reason that I got this New York Times job is because I knew somebody who had good connections with the New York Times and respected my work. You know, I mean, I've spent countless hours on many talent agencies' websites, like filling out the documents, but I'm just another name with a couple of bylines. And it really did make all the difference to know somebody who had an established relationship. And I wouldn't be surprised if Mike, you know, had a relationship because he knew somebody. And, you know, the opportunities when there's breaking news like this is that so many people fly in from New York and DC and all that kind of stuff. And so like networking with them while they're here and not being hostile to your colleagues, particularly when it's like a conflict environment, is really important, and just like making good connections while you're out there. You know, like we had a couple of like weird picnics where like all of these people from all over the international scene kind of came together, and we all had like a picnic like on one of our days off and networked and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that's really important. I do want to say, like, also speaking to a lot of the women that are freelancers, it's really easy for people to not want to negotiate rates with us. And I think it's really easy for women to kind of back down and say, "Oh, if that's what you're offering me, then that's what I'll take." And I have gotten really tired of that in my own career. And so knowing what your rates are, and I openly share my rates with people so that they know that they can charge more than that, is really important, particularly for women who have been told that they don't deserve to have that pay, even though they're putting themselves at risks in a conflict. And the risks are just different for women in conflict. And so I highly, highly recommend pressing for higher rates, and also building in your own worth, which means taking HEFAT training and saying, "I am one of the only people out here who has hazardous environment training. I am one of the only people who knows how to use a camera, be a reporter, and make a film. I am the only one out here who can do A, B, and C." And pushing your worth with your rates is super important, because while the news industry is collapsing, and it has forever been collapsing since I started, it doesn't mean that they can pay us subpar rates, or it's just, especially if you're going into conflict, it's just unacceptable.
And what do you recommend to anything extra to freelancers, hey, from your experience in Atlanta?
Well, I mean, just keep trying, keep plugging away. If you're not getting responses and you're trying to do things, you know, it can take a while. In my case, I think the coronavirus, I think Katie may have mentioned this earlier, actually helped me out in that, yeah, they weren't flying people out to Atlanta. So one way I got on the front page was when Georgia had its primary election a few weeks ago, and they put me on the ground to go to polling places and stuff like that. Georgia ended up having a complete mess of a primary day, and I got on the page that way. A reporter actually mentioned to me that she would have been in Atlanta if not for the coronavirus. That's how I got that assignment. You know, that may have been partially the case with this as well. So, you know, this can be actually an opportunity that's harder to travel. And so, you know, your town, you're in your town, you can get things that way. I've just found too, you know, once you finally kind of break through a little bit and you get to where you're getting hired, you kind of become known. I've gotten, especially the early days of the protest, I was getting calls not only from the Post, but from other outlets. I mean, outlets in England, and I think the Daily Beast called, a few others. I mean, a lot of people like seemed like they were Googling or whatever and were finding me, and I was having to turn them down and try and hook them up with people I know and stuff like that. So once you know, it takes a long time, but you can kind of break through. Once you're kind of there, it's easier to stay there and to get work.
I'm looking to see if we have any questions from the audience. I don't think we have open questions unless someone wants to send something quickly to us.
I mean, and I can speak with that too, is that I had an excess of assignments and I was giving them out to people that I knew. And so that only speaks more to being friendly with your colleagues locally and saying, you know, if you ever have some extra work that you can't handle, like, let me know, because that goes a long way.
I do that not so much as not covering breaking news, but covering workplace and employment law. Knowing someone else who covers the same area and has the, you know, the same background can be helpful. Someone wants to know, did the New York Times or Washington Post have exclusivity rights over your content? Thank you. That's a good question.
For us, yes, I believe they did. Mike was on a different contract than me, but yes, I'm quite sure that his footage is owned and exclusive with New York Times.
Yeah, I don't actually know, but I would be pretty sure that would be the case for the Post as well. I mean, obviously I'm a freelancer, I can write for other outlets on different assignments, but I'm sure for the assignments I did for them, the content that I turned into them would be owned by them.
All right, any other questions from participants?
It looks like there's one that says, any advice for recent graduates trying to gain experience through an internship? Yeah, so one of the things that I did, I was in some internships, but they were heavily competitive. And I basically decided that I wasn't as interested in US issues. And so I was inherently disadvantaged because I just wasn't as interested in them. So I moved to East Africa first when I was 20. I'm 34. I said I was 35 earlier, but I'm actually 34. And then I've been going back and forth ever since, and started a foreign correspondent career in Nairobi, Kenya. And that has exponentially rocketed my career for a number of reasons. It's just not as competitive. The world doesn't have that many stories coming out of East Africa. The pool is really small, and so you get to know people, network with people that give you extra jobs. You know the bureau chiefs. So while it's not necessarily an internship piece of advice that I have, I highly recommend that if you're interested in doing international coverage, to move to a country and do your foreign correspondent work there, because it will rocket your career and expedite your career far, far faster than staying in the United States and covering what everyone else is kind of covering.
I'll put a plug in here for SPJ's international community, which also would be a helpful way if that's an interest of yours. What about domestic internships, Haisten? Do you have any advice for that?
Not on internships per se, but as far as boosting your career, definitely want to, back what Katie said, try to do things that other people are not willing to do. I mean, I'm sure moving to Kenya is not something that a lot of people are necessarily interested in. So if you're willing to do that and do something like that, and you're going to have a big advantage, I think, as she found out. It's not necessarily doing that, but something like that. I would say to freelance. I mean, freelancing is really great. When I started freelancing in 2016, I had not written for any national outlet. I had not even written for the big outlets in Atlanta. It's a lot easier to sell to say, hire me for this one story and see how it works out than it is to say, hire me, 40 hours a week for a full-time job, right? So I've been able to really do that. You get them to get you one assignment, you do well in that assignment, you then build up to another one with them, and you become kind of, I've just gotten a lot more big work through being a freelancer. So definitely freelance. You can do it part-time. You can do it while you're interning. You can actually freelance, usually even when you're working full-time, you can freelance on the side, check with your employer on that, of course. But freelancing to me is a great way to get your name out there if you're willing to do it.
And I see that Susan in the chat recommends getting fellowships, international fellowships, and that's another freelance community plug. Hazel Becker does a wonderful job of keeping track of fellowships that you might be interested in applying for. So great, thank you.
Yeah, I would also say too, diversifying your expertise. So I was primarily an investigative writer for many years and learned photography and video on my own. I never went to school for it. And now that's primarily where my income comes from. So I'd say 80% of my income comes from visuals, though it probably only takes 40% of my time. But I think that that was one of the reasons that I was hired by the Times as well, is because I knew video. And not only did I have the local connections, but I knew how producing a video would go. And so I tell all the people that I mentor, just please learn some visuals, because it will help you just get on the front page if you have a photo to run with a story, but also it diversifies your skills and makes you much more competitive.
Okay, Susan, are you available to talk more about the fellowships? I'm not sure she's able.
Hang on a second. Yeah, no, I'm here. Sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm not an international reporter, but I've done international reporting and have had several colleagues who that's how they got their foot in the door. So there's the Ries Berlin Commission's Journalist Exchange Program, which is a couple of weeks long. That's for broadcast journalists. There's the Burns Fellowship to Germany. There's the US-Austria Journalist Exchange, which I've done all three of those. And it allows you to go and do stories in another country, usually for an American outlet. But I know people who have, I have a friend who works for Bloomberg, and she now lives in Berlin and works for Bloomberg in Berlin. By doing the fellowship programs. So even things like Fulbright, I believe there's one for like early career journalists in Europe. I'm more familiar with the European ones. I know there are others, but if you're interested in international reporting, it's a really good way to get your foot in the door and show that you can do international stories, which then helps you get international jobs or to be able to keep going as an international freelancer.
Good. While we're waiting to see if any more questions come in, I hope we see you all at the Society of Professional Journalists Virtual National Conference on September 12th and 13th, which will have a lot for freelancers. We put a lot together for freelancers. It's going to cover pandemics, protests, and politics. So be sure when we get some information to sign up for that. Anything else? Hazel, take a bow. No questions? Anyone want to have the last word? Is anyone asking for extra pay for pandemic stuff is the question that just came in. You're getting it quicker. Are you?
I mean, I negotiated for a higher rate, though it was still below what I charge for business and nonprofit photography and video. But my justification was I'm working in a pandemic and also a conflict, and you're not offering me medical insurance.
Right.
So, and, you know, I mean, I didn't always mention this, but I'm immunocompromised. So, you know, I think that people really stop in their tracks once freelancers push back and say, look, these are the circumstances that we're working in. I understand that you have a tight budget, you know, obviously, but this is a different situation. And unless you are able to provide somebody on the spot, there are many film sets that hire like a COVID safety person for $700 a month. Unless you're able to provide that to me and provide safety gear and N95s, I'm going to be charging more for my services.
Okay.
There's another question, and the person wants to know if the panelists would be amenable to being added on LinkedIn as connections. Is it okay?
Sure, add me.
Very useful.
Yeah, that's fine. My name is Katie G as in Grace Nelson. Happy to. And I should say that there are other ways to connect with other journalists that I don't know that people are aware of, but on Facebook, there are obviously a lot of Facebook groups, but there's one called the Vulture Club that I'm in. It has a lot of international correspondence. And so if you can get into there and you're looking for international work, or even that's how I got one of my gigs in Minneapolis, was there was like an international paper looking for a reporter in Minneapolis. I highly recommend the Vulture Club as well.
Good.
And
one more question that came in is how you learned about the Washington Post Talent Network.
yeah, so I said that earlier, but it was actually, they contacted me, or Sharon Dunton, who I knew from SPJ Georgia, contacted me. I'm not exactly sure how she learned about it, but it actually was something I was contacted about joining in late 2016. And again, that's totally because of SPJ. I knew Sharon Dunton through SPJ. That was how I heard about it. So I didn't actually go out and look for it. It came.
We've had discussions of it at other SPJ conventions too, I think. I don't know of other talent networks. Do you?
There is one called Story Hunter. That's more for visual journalists. There are some reporting opportunities. But, you know, a lot of these kind of talent networks like Story Hunter take a portion of what you make to fund their platform. And so I think Story Hunter is good in the fact that you set up a profile. I've gotten a couple of gigs off of them, but then making a relationship with the editor that hires you through the platform and saying, look, let's just not do this on Story Hunter. Let's just make sure that we all get paid fairly. You know, so Story Hunter is one of them. I think, does Reuters have one? I feel like Reuters might have one as well.
Yeah, I don't know of any other particular outlets that have anything like the talent. I do think it's cool. And yeah, they were represented. Lori Montgomery was the IJ last year. She's from the Post, and had a session, if you guys went to it, that talked about the talent network. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. There are like third party ones, I think, like Upwork and Fiverr and things like that. I did some of those when I first started freelancing and got offers to write stories for like $12.
Yes.
So I quickly stopped doing anything with those, and mostly I worked my connections the way you would traditionally. But the talent network that the Post has, I think, is really cool, and I think it's something that some other outlets should look into doing, honestly.
Thank you very much. This was great. We appreciate your help. And now I know if I get called again, what I need to do. A lot more.
Wear a helmet. Wear a helmet.
Wear a helmet. Yes. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you all. Appreciate your being here.
Okay. Goodbye.
Hey,